This is VOA News. Via remote, I'm Marissa Melton. U.S. President Donald Trump said Tuesday that the United States is going to put a very powerful hold on money it sends to the World Health Organization, saying it had not correctly predicted the progress of the coronavirus pandemic. At Tuesday's coronavirus briefing at the White House, Mr. Trump said they called it wrong. They missed the call. He seemed to hint that the organization may have done so out of deference to China, where the novel coronavirus was first reported. They seem to be very China-centric, the president said. We have to look into that. The United States is the largest contributor to the WHO. When asked by a reporter whether it would be prudent to strangle funding to the organization amid a pandemic, the president denied he said he was doing that, modifying his remark to, "We're going to look into it." The United States suffered its worst daily death toll yet in the coronavirus pandemic on Tuesday. More than 1,700 deaths reported before all state totals were in. The death toll for the United States has now risen past 12,000. The United States has the third highest official death toll in the world for coronavirus deaths, behind Italy and Spain. More than 40% of the U.S. deaths have been in the state of New York, and the majority of those in New York City. The state's governor, Andrew Cuomo, reported a potential sign of progress in containing the spread of coronavirus with a drop in hospitalizations Tuesday and also a drop in the number of critically ill patients. Despite the outbreak, the Midwestern U.S. state of Wisconsin started in-person voting Tuesday in a Democratic presidential primary. Hundreds of poll workers refused to come to work because of the pandemic. In Milwaukee, the state's biggest city, only 5 of the city's planned 180 polling stations were open. From Washington, D.C., you're listening to VOA News. Peter Navarro, the trade advisor to U.S. President Donald Trump, warned in 2 newly disclosed White House memos in January and February of the dire consequences of an outbreak of the deadly coronavirus in the United States. Meanwhile, the president continued to publicly downplay concerns for weeks longer. In late January, Navarro estimated that as many as 543,000 Americans could die from the initial global spread of the virus that had first erupted in China. A month later, he suggested the coronavirus could kill from 1 million to 2 million Americans. Navarro's memos, disclosed in stories Tuesday in the New York Times and on the Axios News website, are the latest indication that some White House aides signaled to Trump they were worried about the coronavirus long before the president voiced public concern. British Prime Minister Boris Johnson is spending a second night in the intensive care unit of a London hospital undergoing treatment for COVID-19. A spokesman for the Prime Minister said Tuesday he remains stable and in good spirits. British Foreign Secretary Dominic Raab, who is serving as interim leader while Johnson is being treated, on Tuesday described Johnson as a fighter and expressed confidence he would recover. The 55-year-old Johnson went to the hospital Sunday evening with a fever and other persistent coronavirus symptoms. Until then, he'd been isolating at home after testing positive for the disease nearly 2 weeks ago. As recently as Friday, he characterized his symptoms as minor. Acting Navy Secretary Thomas Modly has resigned after firing the captain of an aircraft carrier who sent out a plea for help after a coronavirus outbreak on his ship. U.S. Defense Secretary Mark Esper announced Modly's departure Tuesday after a meeting between the two men. Modly last week fired Captain Brett Crozier, captain of the USS Theodore Roosevelt, saying he had shown extremely poor judgment in widely distributing by email a letter calling for urgent help with the COVID-19 outbreak aboard his ship. Modly then flew to the ship at port in Guam and delivered a speech to the crew in which he lambasted Crozier, saying he was, in his words, either too naive or too stupid to be in charge of an aircraft carrier. On Monday night, at Esper's insistence, Modly issued a public apology for his language. Crozier, who was cheered and applauded by his crew as he left the ship last week, has since tested positive for coronavirus. Meanwhile, the number of coronavirus cases among sailors from the USS Theodore Roosevelt continues to rise. Navy officials told VOA Tuesday that 230 of the Roosevelt's 5,000 sailors had tested positive for coronavirus. About 48% of the crew has been evacuated from Roosevelt so it can be disinfected. Via remote, I'm Marissa Melton. You're listening to VOA.